Everyone in the audience just missed us last week when we weren't here. And actually, I wasn't even here the week before because I was stuck in the office. So I'm sure everybody has just been crying. Where is RedHawk? I want him to return. Where is Pete? I want him back. There's been great gnashing of teeth. They've been waiting for us to return. But we are back for another episode of Pony Express Radio, joined tonight by Mr. Pete Quinones. How are you, Pete?
We did a live stream last week.
No. We didn't do anything. Nope. Didn't happen. Did not happen. I don't know what you're talking about. All we did was stream some Warhammer. That's all we did. People can become members of the OGC channel to watch our various Warhammer streams. If you guys are so inclined, we have a lot of fun over there. But no, other than that, there was no streaming that occurred. Of course not. And joining us tonight is our good friend, Mr. Thomas777. How are you, Thomas?
I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, before we get into the topic, because of course it was St. Patrick's Day this week, we do need to keep the lights on over here. So we need to talk about all of our various sponsors and friends who are doing their great projects. So, guys, it looked like for a bit there that White Boy Winter was in recession, but now it's come back with a vengeance over the last week. But rest assured, White Boy Summer will return once again. So you guys need to head on over to Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching, where JD will get you guys whipped into shape for White Boy Summer. Link is down in the description. While you're at it, get your caffeine fix with Fox & Sons Coffee, good friend of the show and the broader online right in general. Be sure to give him some of your patronage and your money for your caffeine fix. Link is also in the description. While you guys are at it, get your nicotine fix, because we here at OGC are fans of big tobacco. Head on over to Alp nicotine pouches. Link is also in the description. Alp is getting me through tax season. I've got a tin sitting in my desk in the office right now. So it's helping me stay focused and get stuff done this time of year. So definitely head on over to Alp. While you guys are at it, you need to be looking sharp as ever. Everyone knows when you go to an OGC conference who is wearing a Vendrillo suit. So head on over to MS Vendrillo Suits. A link is also in the description. You guys can be looking suave as ever. I'm looking forward to getting fitted for one at the national conference this year, and everyone in the audience should have a sharp looking suit in their wardrobe. And then also give some support and love to American Spirits host and fellow friend of the show, Mr. George Bagby. His Tall Man Books series has been doing some amazing stuff, bringing books back into print from the 19th and 20th century related to all manners of American history. So be sure to check out Tall Man Books for all of your historical book needs. All right, gentlemen. Well, as mentioned, it was St. Patrick's Day this week. But we're here to talk about the Irish influence in America from the very beginning. One of the things that I wanted to contribute to this conversation is the Irish have always been trotted out as to be like, for some reason, whenever we were in high school, whenever we were in college, this is always something that was rammed down our throats all the time about when they were trying to shove all the diversity nonsense in us. And throughout the 2010s, it's like, oh, well, all these other groups, whether it's blacks, browns, what have you, were treated just like the Irish, because when the Irish came to America, they were treated like shit. So you white people, yada, 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 it always seems like the Irish have always been the low man on the totem pole whipping boy as it relates to the concept of white race as in the American context. So I don't know, Thomas, why don't you just take us away here about the first ways of Irish immigration into the United States and how were they actually treated when they first arrived in America?
Well, there's a few things contributing to that narrative. There's a whole pastiche of factors, some of which are grounded in a rather tragic history, some of which owes to grievances based on sectarian hostility, which in America until recently was a very serious thing. And some of it too is, as the Nuremberg system was implemented in earnest and these Cold War social engineering imperatives became the top priority of the regime, that's part of it too, is finding a white ethnic group to say, oh, see, these people aren't, black or brown, but they were similarly oppressed by the same mechanisms. So it's all those things. I I like the Irish a lot. I mean, much as a kid, I kind of am Irish, admittedly from the Protestant side, confessionally and culturally. And Chicago still has a very large, Irish presence, kind of an outsized presence. I mean, you go to places like Beverly or Bridgeport, there's those are Irish communities. And, the South Side Parade remains a big deal here. And we still get Irish immigration. You run into Irish guys and girls from the old country here. Chicago still has European immigration, and not just from the old East Bloc. Chicago is sort of an unusual place in various regards. But the first slaves in America were white. I'm not talking about indentured servants. I mean slaves. Thomas Sowell got into this. So did, of all people, Jim Goad, who's kind of a silly guy, but he used to be a bit more serious. And one of the things that put the book White Cargo on the map, which is a really great book, was Jim Goad cited it in one of his polemical texts that sold reasonably well. And quite literally, the first slaves who set foot on American soil were a couple hundred white children. And it's believed they were a combination of orphans from what was viewed as problematic classes. This was after the first poor laws were passed, I believe. And, a lot of children, as well as a lot of people who were considered to be constitutional incorrigibles, prostitutes, people who were consistently homeless or without gainful employment, they'd find themselves in the colonies. And some people were just swept up because they were young men with a strong back, who were obviously needed to do back-breaking labor, and they didn't have anybody to advocate for them, so they were simply shanghaied. But most of those people were ethnically Irish, okay? So there probably was, it's difficult, you can come up with data on the raw numbers of white slaves from the 17th century until the time the practice basically ceased. But obviously it's difficult to conclusively determine what these people's ethnic group was. You can go by last names, obviously, but in some cases this can be discerned from the documentary record. In some cases it can't, but it can be reasonably inferred that there was probably an outsized percentage of ethnically Irish people among these white slaves. Okay, and there was always bad blood across the sectarian divide because a lot of the founding stock of America, I'm talking about the yeomanry. I'm not talking about rich men. I'm not talking about men who had the benefit of charter company contracts from the crown. I'm talking about the yeomanry that built, the South specifically, but also had a discernibly outsized impact in the North. A lot of these people were Ulster Scots, whose conceptual horizon derived from the experience of the Ulster plantation, which, in terms of its brutality, was not unlike the experience people had on the frontier, contra the Cheyenne. It was incredibly brutal. Some of these early Ulster plantation sites, they were walled in like fortresses almost, because the understanding was that the indigenous element is going to assault and try to murder everybody. And to be fair, not without cause, the Scottish settler conquerors were not particularly kind to these people. So sort of baked in to the early American experience was a hostility across the sectarian divide. And then you add to that the Anglo-Saxon mythology of America. We talked about this a few weeks ago on Pete's pod. You know, this mythology of America, and you find this explicitly stated in the Federalist Papers, particularly John Jay and Hamilton emphasize this. You know, the myth being, or the mythology being, we're an Anglo-Saxon people, we're a Germanic race, we were subjugated by this corrupt monarchy that was essentially Latin in culture and race, and they imposed this unnatural Roman order on us. So we're reclaiming our birthright as it existed when, you know, Britain was an Anglo-Saxon land. And, you know, we're the chosen people to realize that destiny. And here we are in this, you know, land of Providence's great bounty. You know, and I don't need to point out the concrete particulars for people to understand that that's at base a profoundly anti-Catholic narrative. That's part of the early American identity, is being anti-Catholic. You know, and that's why something that's really interesting to me, and it shows the conceptual illiteracy of the left. You know, the Klan at its peak, I'm talking the 1920s Klan, the post-Birth of a Nation Klan, they were a sectarian organization. Like, don't get me wrong, I mean, they believed the races should live separately, and they didn't believe in miscegenation, obviously, but this idea that they were obsessed with keeping blacks in line or something, that wasn't what they were into. They were a sectarian organization. First, last, and always, you know, America must remain a Protestant land, and more specifically, a dissenter Protestant culture. You know, and interestingly, and again, this cuts to the historical illiteracy of the left. Trump's father was arrested for a fray sometime in the 1930s. And basically what had happened is Trump's dad was this Protestant Dutch type who was a builder and a landlord in New York City, and he was getting leaned on by a bunch of Irish police who were doing muscle work for, you know, Irish labor concerns. So old man Trump calls in some Klan support, and they fight it out, you know, and presumably the right palms were greased, and the case went away with a, you know, comparatively minor citation for a fray. But it shows you how the left has no idea of the history of this country, even, you know, even stuff that's almost within living memory. Otherwise, they would have made a huge deal about that, you know. But they don't understand the actual conflict dyads in America between populations, you know. And but that wasn't odd. You know, that situation Trump's father was in, apparently. Sectarianism, you know, my mom, who was born immediately after World War II, she wasn't a bigot. She'd be nice to all kinds of people, but I mean, she'd casually say unflattering things about Catholics. You know, Kennedy being elected was a huge deal. And it was a hell of a lot more significant than some nobody like Obama being elected, for example, because there was no context to Obama being elected. An Irish Catholic like Kennedy from the East Coast with deep roots in you know, not just the East Coast establishment, but also the, you know, with his hands in Boston machine politics and stuff. You know, that would have been unthinkable even 20 years previously. You know, so that's this kind of pastiche of thing sort of conspired to create the, and if in America up until the 1920s or 30s, people would say that, no N-words or Irish welcome on this premises. It becomes ridiculous. It becomes this apocryphal victim story, but it does emerge from real tensions. And even, and again, I think Irish people are great, and the insular Celts are they're something of a standard bearer of the Aryan race, I think. Okay, they're just incredible people. So I'm not saying mean things about them, but they do have something of an inferiority complex, I think. And maybe that's changing. I don't know. When I was a kid and a teenager, when unfortunately the troubles were raging in Northern Ireland, you'd disembark at Union Station and there'd be college-age guys and girls trying to hand you literature, saying, the British are genociding Ireland, and Brits out of Ireland. And this was something people were very passionate about, and being kind of like a redneckish prod with very Anglophone parents, that made an impression on me, maybe more than it would have other kids.
It's interesting.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting on that because at least when I was growing up, it's like with this diversity nonsense we're growing up and everything, but it always seemed like the only basically white group that you were allowed to say like, oh, I've got some ancestry part of this. Like everybody always wanted to be saying like, oh, I have a little bit of Irish in me or some Irish ancestry in me or something like that. It was like the same thing as well. Everyone was trying to get claim that they were part Native American or something.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I got like some Indian blood in me, but nobody was ever clamoring to say, oh, like I've got French in me or I've got some English or something like that. It was always, oh, like, well, I'm a little bit Irish, and maybe that is true. I mean, I know a lot of people have like Irish admixture, especially if you're Ellis Island Coalition or family come from like New York or something like that. But yeah, it's interesting that.
Well, I posted my 23andMe up, and it's interesting because I'm actually like overwhelmingly like Anglo-Irish, and I've also got I'm basically I'm Huguenot, I'm Huguenot, Ulster Irish, and German, and my German granny was of the Ostpreuß kind, so people will claim I'm Polish, or they'll claim that I'm or they'll claim that I'm like a petty N-word, which is funny, even though it's hostile with code nature.
Thomas, you mentioned Kennedy, and his connections on the East Coast. I would assume he had some pretty good connections back in the Isles, considering Joe was, ambassador to Great Britain.
Oh yeah, tremendously. And even, that old show, it's a pretty good show, but I mean, it's hokey gangster Tommy gun stuff. But, Boardwalk Empire, I'm going somewhere with this. You ever watch Boardwalk Empire?
Yeah, very good show.
Yeah.
You know how Nucky
I thought it was a good show.
Nucky Thompson, despite his very Protestant name, in the show, he's this Irish American guy, and he gets hold of a bunch of Thompson SMGs that were slated for the Western Front, but of course, the war ended, so he gets hold of a consignment of them, and he gets them to the IRA, because that's something he's making sure there's a line of weapons and money going over there, and that was a real thing. The reason why the Provost had Armalites basically as soon as the U.S. Army got them. That's why, ironically, in a lot of loyalist murals, it's masked gunmen with Kalashnikovs, and the Provosts are always holding Armalites. You'd think it would be the opposite, but it's because on the loyalist side, they always had trouble getting weapons. so it was sort of this hodgepodge of different platforms. But the Provos had Armalites in the 60s, and that's because they had a lot of people here pulling for them, and a lot of those people had money. So I undoubtedly that's a whole other story. Like Roosevelt wanted to both antagonize the British and antagonize Joe Kennedy. That's why he posted him to the UK. And as I think I mentioned in our World War II series, Joe Kennedy was convinced Churchill might try to murder him, owing to the fact that Kennedy was a solid opponent of the New Dealers, and he was absolutely opposed to making war on Germany, as was the Irish Republic. People conveniently forget that, But yeah,
I don't think the Jews have forgotten that.
Well, no, but I'm talking about like normie historians and stuff. Like they got, no, of course not. There's tremendous enmity there and animosity. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Ireland's been targeted for destruction in very discreet ways, as has the Russian Federation and Darul Islam. There's a particular animus there above and beyond the social engineering regime that is, that's intended to be imposed on this entire planet. But I'm sure Joe Kennedy and as well as JFK and his brothers had substantial contacts in the old country, that without a doubt.
You know what other TV show tried to shoehorn in? They actually tried to shoehorn in a Northern Ireland arc of a bunch of episodes. Was Sons of Anarchy.
That show is so unbelievably stupid. It's like, I mean, for people who haven't seen this show, I thought it was a satire. Like, I literally did. It's about this anti-racist liberal biker gang that gets mad about racism, and they name their gang after a Jewish feminist because they sit around reading Emma Goldman, and their ops are guys who try and get people into racism. It's like imagine some mentally defective Walmart normie who thinks he's Billy Badass, but he also spends all day watching Rachel Maddow. This is the infantile fantasy he masturbates over. It's like PC principle stuff, but of the most infantile variety. You can't make this up. And there's all these white N-words that's a great show, Sons of Anarchy. It's like, bro, anti-racist bikers. Really, man? Really? So it figures some small hat writer would be like, yeah, and then there's Northern Ireland. And then the bikers decide that they gotta feed children in Africa. Anybody, if I ever, I'm pretty discriminating in the company I keep, and I don't hang out with uncool people. But if I'm forced into a situation, at some party or something, or somebody's wife's birthday, and some idiot who sidled up to my table says he watches that show, I refuse to speak to him. You might as well say that you suck a dick or something. It's like, how could you possibly watch that garbage? But the other thing worse is people like The Sopranos, and that show is so fucking stupid. It's just embarrassing, and I don't know. Like I said, people think I'm this big snob. It's not like I only sit around watching, The Prisoner or the original Alfred Hitchcock Presents or something. I watch some junk food for the brain type shows too. Like I said, I like Boardwalk Empire, and what was it? I'm not saying that people shouldn't watch silly stuff too, but if you watch that kind of I find something particularly offensive and gay about this PC principle kind of stuff, especially when it's coded for really, really, really stupid people. I just do. I don't know. It's cringy, man. It's it's indecent or something. Laughing at
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Boardwalk Empire was also pretty good for showing the Jewish connection to the Italian mafia.
No, yeah.
Well, it showed the tension too between them and the black folks, and I liked the subplot or the narrative arc of the guy played by Michael Pitt, who he's this disturbed World War I vet, and he carries around his Mark 7 trench knife, which is a ruthless knife. That's the coolest combat knife of all time, and it's clear. There's only a very brief scene where they show his experiences in the trenches. And he clicks up with this guy. He's Rappy, is this sniper who got shot in the face. So he's horribly disfigured. And he's got just this metal plate. He looks almost like a Phantom of the Opera. And it's an obvious nod to that. And the Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera is one of my very favorite movies. But that's not Hollywood. If you saw, they quite literally give you a tin mask if you were maimed like that, because obviously plastic surgery didn't really exist, and in lieu of terrifying children or making people sick, you don a mask. And I've got I've got a fascination for World War I, and there's something just incredibly horrific about it, but also just fascinating. And that's when modern warfare truly arrived, in my opinion. I mean, arguably it was the Crimea, the war between the states. No, World War I was a game changer across the entire spectrum. But that era too, I mean, obviously my favorite decade is 1950s, that should go without saying. But I think the 19-teens, the 1920s are just sort of cool. The optics and everything like that. And when I was stuck at the airport, that's an opportunity for one's mind to wander, and you contemplate a great many things, prosaic and profound. But I harbor this fascination for airship travel, especially because I came across years ago, there was this GeoCities site that documented one of these, like all the literature, promotional literature and everything else, like magazine spreads of the flight company or the carrier that the Hindenburg was part of. And it's just amazing. And there was this luxurious dining room with obviously a picture of the Fuhrer on the wall. And it was like something out of science fantasy or something, just like floating on this airship. It's almost like an alternative future, or something. So when I was stranded at the airport, I was like, man, I wish I could float on an airship and not be dealing with this airport nonsense. But
air travel just used to be so much more interesting than it is today.
When I was a little kid, it was cool, man. They actually had good food. They'd give you like an actual meal, and they'd give you one or two options. They'd give you these eel honey roasted peanuts. They were a staple, so much that colloquially people called them airline peanuts. And they'd make sure your drinks were fresh and stuff. And it was actually like flying always kind of made me uncomfortable, even when I was a kid. But it was mitigated by the fact that it was cool. And now it's anything but cool. But I forgive the random tangent about airships, but there's something just fascinating about that whole era. I mean, even more so, I guess if you were deposited in Chicago or Manhattan in 1929, it would seem like you were on some alien civilization, way more than if you found yourself in a different epoch, I think, because the trajectory of technology and everything else, it just seems so different. And so much of that technology ended up being a dead end, and new modalities were configured that replaced them.
Well, you can understand why when you look at media of the time, like old Looney Tunes cartoons or something, where they try to predict what the future is going to look like, and it's just not really even remotely close to how it actually turned out. It's like they're thinking of what the future would be. Just
No,
seems
it's
like way
fascinating,
cooler.
and it's also well, that's why the Spruce Goose. I guess you could say that some of these massive, aircraft, like the C-5 Galaxy, were in part like the DNA of the Spruce Goose was in part in them, but it's the way Howard Hughes, and he had a better sense than a lot of these great innovators did, but he believed that essentially maritime commerce and naval warfare was just going to disappear because everything was going to be take to the sky. And one of his later drawings was of this massive, basically a flying aircraft carrier, some utterly massive aircraft, and there were a dozen like air superiority fighters that would disembark from these platforms on its wings, and obviously it had some sort of nuclear capability, like nuclear cannons on it and stuff. I mean, it's like something some like insane kid would come up with, but it's like, okay, like to your point, within that paradigm, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. People thinking like, oh no, the ocean is going to be in the sky now, and it's really interesting. But yeah, forgive me, we were supposed to be talking about the Irish. I didn't mean to turn this over into nerd conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we kind of alluded to this topic a little bit earlier in the discussion, but you hear this term get thrown around quite a bit, even to this day, about the various demographics that came to make up America, and specifically the South. Thomas, can you explain to us the origins of the Scots-Irish?
Yeah, well, as I said, the Northern Ireland has a very complicated history and a very deep heritage. The Ulster cycle is something I highly recommend Anglophone people. Along with Arthurian lore and the King James Bible, that's sort of the cultural canon. So there's a significance to Northern Ireland beyond the sectarian divide and some of the more tragic aspects of its history. There's a lot of the root, if you want to think of it as a lot of the founding populations of Ireland and the British Isles have at least partial origins there. But when we're talking about the Scots-Irish or the Ulster Scots, there was always Ireland essentially proved to be unconquerable. Okay, owing to a number of reasons, including the fact that this hostile island, quite literally on Britain's flank, that was loyal to Rome, represented an existential threat. Particularly in eras when sea power was everything. It was imperative to dominate it, and also there's just very little arable land in Britain. I mean, Britain's a rocky island. It's the same. It's the same quagmire, that the Japanese have always had to endure. I mean, obviously, Britain's not volcanic like the Japanese home islands are, but the solution, as it were, to the problem that the English crown had was to deploy this colonizer yeoman population in the form of the Scots to the Ulster, what was to become the Ulster Plantation. And despite what you see in movies like Braveheart, the Scots and the English, their relationship is complicated. I think of it in some ways, it's almost the relationship of the English to the people who became the Ulster Scots. It's almost like that between the Japanese and the Koreans. It's an imperfect analogy, but this settler population was primarily Scottish dissenter Protestants, who were always sort of the shock element of what became the British Empire later on. They were a warrior yeomanry caste. And, there also were some ethnically English people who settled the Ulster plantation as well, but the majority were ethnically, culturally, and confessionally Scottish. And this touched off a centuries-long conflict paradigm. And but it's interesting, okay, because there's it seems an odd an odd example, and it seems highly discreet and anecdotal, but there's something significant here. The only loyalist paramilitary group that was never compromised by special branch was Red Hand Commando. Red Hand Commando would tag their murals in Gaelic. They were the only loyalists who did that. And there's this brand of esoteric loyalism that emphasizes deep insular Celtic racial and ethnic roots, which isn't wrong. Scottish people, the Lowland Scots are descended from Picts, in part from Vikings and Danes, and in part from, Celts. So there's a complicated relationship that the Ulster Scots have to Ireland. And also, there's a reason why I talk about the sort of dissenter prod diaspora, like colloquially the woodpile. By the way, too, some idiot the other day in the comments section that I'm a moron for using the term peckerwood because that's a prison term from the 1980s. No, it's not. It literally is. It dates to well before the war between the states. Look it up. But aside from that, I talk about the woodpile diaspora owing to a combination of dissenters being pogromed, in France, in the Benelux countries, elsewhere on the continent. There was a lot of migration of Huguenots, of Dutch, of Swiss, of Germans to places like South Africa, to places like Ulster, where they'd be welcomed, but not just because they were brothers and sisters in the faith and who were welcomed in the congregation, but these populations needed people who could fight and weren't afraid of death and weren't afraid of violence. So there's an interesting ethnic mix within Northern Ireland's Protestants, and again, the majority are Ulster Scots or Scottish. They're overwhelmingly culturally Scottish. That's the dominant cultural modality. But the novel and the film Resurrection Man, Pete and I actually reviewed it. That's one of my favorite pieces of conflict literature from the Troubles. What the secondary antagonist is this? He's this loyalist hitter named Darky Larsh, and he's a Huguenot, and his street name is Darky because he's a swarthy French guy. But that wasn't uncommon. There'd be loyalists with clearly Anglified German names or Huguenot names. Just like you find in South Africa, just like you find in Australia and New Zealand, and that's something that very, very strong dissenter and outsider faith, frankly, was one of the things that bound these people together. And that's one of the reasons I think we're an ill understood people. Just dissenters generally, but Ulster Scots especially. Because on the one hand, we're not, we don't act like Mediterranean people do, for example. But we are clannish, but in sort of a different way than, people think of Greek people or Italian people or even our Irish Catholic brothers are, It's an odd kind of individualism and hostility to organizational models of authority that's coextant with a kind of deep clannishness, and people don't really understand that. I think that's one of the reasons too why we're the favorite target of the accusation of being racist. I mean, it's like a meaningless term, obviously, but on the one hand, people look at us as, okay, you're the consummate individuals and things, and you kind of come at people as they are, but then in very punctuated and conspicuous ways, it's like we put our own first, and that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. I mean, not that we care, but I think that's part of it,
Yeah, for sure. What do you think, Pete?
My dealings, I grew up around the Irish. I grew up in an Irish neighborhood in the Bronx that was transitioning out of Irish. There used to be a huge clan in the Highbridge section around Yankee Stadium, and they eventually started moving to the North Bronx, and just being around them, they, my first crush was on an Irish girl because that's what was there, and I just thought they were insanely clannish. I mean, they were the kind of people who would fight with each other all day, and then if someone just looked at one of them wrong, they all just jumped in. And they all just jumped to
definitely like to fight, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, fight and drink is I mean, that is not a stereotype at all. But I also, growing up in New York, I had some dealings with the NYPD. I know that must be a shocker to most people. So I'm dealing mostly with Irish cops. And I mean, honestly, they were some of the best friends I ever had in my whole life. And a lot of the guys I went to high school with, I can think of one in particular. I'm not going to name him, who became NYPD and then went on to even bigger and better things in the NYPD. And they always treated me as, like a brother. So, I've never had, I joke about I make as many jokes about the Irish as anybody else does, but I also make jokes about Polacks, and I make jokes about everybody because I grew up in a time where racial jokes were just what you threw at each other, and until someone got mad and started throwing hands. But I mean, growing up where I did and being around the Irish, you just couldn't help but notice. What was the old thing is about like how close Italians think they are, that they wish they were as close. Italian brothers were as close to each other as Irish brothers are. Yeah.
I like the Irish. It's my birthright to make fun of the Irish. Like, so but I mean, I mean, and like I said, I mean, in a real sense, like I am Irish, just not in the way that, we mean when we're talking about Irish Catholics. But yeah, it's all,
well, and I grew up mostly, the ones I grew up around were Irish Catholics. I mean,
well, no, of course, we say Irish American, that's what we're talking about. That's why there's a great book called The Other Irish. And, it's about the Ulster Scots in America, because like we're not Irish in that sense, You know,
right.
Yeah,
You were dragged away, and thrown on an island. another island.
Yeah, well, it's if you want to foobar a target area and then colonize it, you drop the Ulster Scots there. You know, if they can't drink it or fuck it, they'll kill it.
Well, what was your I know you've had some mild criticisms of Albion Seed. What is there anything in there about the Ulster and the Irish that
yeah, it's been a few years since I read it. That's one of those books I refer to periodically. It's been probably 3 or 4 years since I've read it in its entirety. I mean, it's mostly about Anglophone dialects and cultural habits and conceptual horizons and how those broke down. And then for a small country and a small ethnos, there's a lot of diversity in England, especially when you consider that the Dane law literally cut a swath through it. You know, like I told you, like I ended up in when I lived outside in the Cotswolds for like a week, which was incredible when I was a young man. And then after walking endlessly, we came across this ancient village, and it was a bunch of super tall people who looked like Rutger Hauer or something. It was like a bunch of people who looked like our friend Anders, you know, and it was, and you know, there's not one England, you know, is what I'm getting at. And Albion Seed, that's the main thrust of it. It's very much an ethno-cultural and anthropological study of Anglo-America. I'm sure that there's some treatment of the Irish and particularly the Ulster Scots, and you know, especially because basically too the high church caste, if you want to look at it that way, people like Robert E. Lee, you know, the Virginia planter aristocracy. I mean, they were their background was Anglo-Latin, you know. Stonewall, one of the reasons he was beloved by the men, despite his severity and the fact that he was a teetotaler and he didn't get chummy with anybody, but I mean, he was one of their tribe. You know, he was an Ulster Scot, Calvinist through and through. But yeah, I mean, Albion Seed's a great book, but it doesn't deal in any truly substantial capacity with the subject matter we're on.
Yeah. One of those ones that I know is quite beloved in our circles. But yeah, and if people want to know more about that, they can listen to the early episodes of American Spirits, where they delve into Albion Seed. Why don't we go over the waves of Irish immigration into the United States? Because it's definitely been one of the more consistent ones throughout the last several hundred years. I mean, I know one of the ones that was talked about in our circles quite a bit is the fact that Abraham Lincoln imported a bunch of them to go fight in the Civil War. So, I mean, the Irish have been coming here for a long, long time.
Oh yeah, and like I said, the point of the first slaves in America were white and substantially Irish. I mean, the Irish have been here as long as any heritage Americans have been, and it's also it becomes confused as well because, at least, and I'm not trying to be crass or something, the old school terms invoked where you talk about the lace curtain Irish and the shanty Irish, because there really was a class divide, you know, and on the East Coast especially. I mean, even I haven't hung around Boston since the early 2000s, like the very early 2000s, and even then, you know, you had a real obvious caste divide that seemed weird for America. You know, But be as it may, there were upper class Irish men and women who blended in essentially seamlessly with the Anglophone elite. And nobody looked askance at them or viewed them as inferiors or somehow not white or something. So there is, and I mean, to be fair, if you're talking about European immigration, Western European immigration, that remains insular over generations here, the genetic distance between aristocrats and commoners is substantial. They're almost a different ethnic group, if you want to look at it that way. And not just in terms of habit and sometimes language, but even in terms of their biological and genetic profile. So there wasn't a single Irish America. I guess that's what I'm getting at. And the big it's no oversimplification, but it's illustrative, I think, because it was such a breach with precedent, and the advent of high speed travel, by sea, rail, and what was then nascent air travel. The 20th century changed everything, and that's why immigration got essentially cut off completely with the 1924 Act. And that endured for 40 years. So we're basically talking about, I don't know the meaningful inputs off the top of my head, and immigration patterns aren't one of my primary concentrations, but you had consistent immigration from Ireland really from just after the Westphalian Peace, really until the first decade of the 20th century. And then it abruptly stopped for 40 years for all practical purposes. That's why the 1965 Act was so... It's fascinating if you read the legislative history and the minutes from Congress in session, where you've got these proponents of the bill, including the always grotesque Teddy Kennedy, insisting up and down that the then extant, racial and ethnic balance isn't going to be upset because this bill is narrowly tailored to preserve the status quo in terms of overall percentages represented of these different populations. It betrays a real naivete and a real perfidy, depending on who we're talking about. But that was, don't get me wrong, Kennedy, Teddy, was a particularly grotesque character, and and he was as bad as any as any arch race traitor today that parasitically subsists off the taxpayers. But the Cold War, the fix was in because of the Cold War. Okay, there would have been the racial core of America would have been undermined by way of immigration policy manipulation to realize the intended effect. That was that's something that's kind of like lost in the. I try to discuss these things with normies. If normies don't fuck with social media anymore, but it's just these people they've got these just simpletons ideas, like as if the 1965 Immigration Reform Act, they talk about it was like a tax bill or something. Like, oh, there should have been base people who said no, we won't vote that way, So you don't get it. Like, this was going to happen because what was at stake with the conflict dyad was between billions of people living under a hostile competitor system and the free world, as it was called. I mean, and that actually had a context back then. And the conflict dyad was to determine the configuration of globalism. You can't win that struggle if you say this system is only for white people. I mean, obviously. That's why the critical juncture was, the Second World War, because that's obviously what facilitated the aforementioned conditions. But this idea that it's liberals or like an absence of based people or something who just weren't there to stop bad legislation. It's incredibly infantile that people think that way. It's not to say that there wasn't a better way to manage that situation. Obviously there was, and obviously attempts at forced integration at literal gunpoint. I mean, that's preposterous. That's an absurd iteration of self-defeating tyranny that's as ridiculous as anything the Soviets did to their population. I mean, that's what, and not to go too far afield, that's something I try and emphasize to people when they claim everything sucks, everything is lost. That, I mean, it's like, do you realize how catastrophically this regime failed? Like, we're literally going to point guns at children and teenagers to force them into proximity to each other. Then when black people don't act like we want them to, we're going to lock 1 million of them in prison. Like, that's some like great big win to you. I mean, this could not have failed more catastrophically.
It is always a white pill when some of us younger guys have conversations with people who've been in this thing longer than we have, and it's really important to be put in that perspective of we just live in such interesting times compared to now, where I can actually talk to people who have some understanding as to why the situation we're in right now has so many problems, and the fact that like the regime right now is just burning credibility at an unprecedented scale. Well, I mean, yeah, we've got our problems, obviously, but it is important to have that context. And I think a lot of young people miss out on that if they don't have this kind of communication between the generations, which was something that was just way more common for anyone else in any period in history. But now, because of just modernity, this communication between generations is something you actually have to proactively seek out.
No, it's affirmative. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I make the point of, I mean, I'm blessed that, I'm blessed that I don't want to sound like some sentimental slob, but I'm blessed I have friends like you guys and the fellas. I mean, I really am. That's incredible. And I feel very loved, and I can't emphasize that enough how great that is and how humbling that is. But and I wouldn't want to be a young person for $1 billion. Being young is really tough, man. I mean, aside from my physical health being poor, my life is a friggin' cakewalk compared to when I was 19 or 22 or something. Being young is really, really, really hard, man. And these days it's particularly screwed up. I realize that. And especially young guys looking to start families and stuff. I mean, that's always a challenge, but there's peculiar challenges these days. I realize that, and I don't minimize that. But on the other hand, the fact that there's literally millions of people who look at the regime as a hostile actor, and matters are openly discussed that 25 or 30 years ago would be considered just an utterly unacceptable perspective, that's incredible. And also just at street level, on the one hand, like I was talking to my barber retired, so I'm looking for another regular barber, and his sister-in-law or his cousin is this Colombian lady. She's actually quite attractive, so it's nice. I mean, there's nothing funny going on there, but if you're an old guy like me, it's important to talk to women sometimes, otherwise you get weird. I mean, it's appropriate. She's like my age, but so you're talking about I was wearing a rock t-shirt. She was talking, she's like, you remember when Clark and Belmont was always hopping, and there was this whole subculture, like Punk and Donuts days and stuff. So we were talking about that. And she's like, I went there not long ago with a girlfriend, and, it's like any other neighborhood now. And I'm like, yeah. And I mean, she's right. Like, on the one hand, that kind of rawness and grittiness has disappeared from a lot of hoods. But on the other hand, in those days, when I was going to shows and stuff, I'd have to plot my movements to not get my ass kicked or worse. Because on sight, you'd get hurt, in a black hood. And to be fair, like I said before, if you were some black guy like talking shit or causing trouble in a white hood, something bad would happen to you. Like, that's unthinkable today, man. Like, I wouldn't, there's a grand total. Pilsen and Little Village I'm not trashing those hoods. I know people's from there and I like them, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with being from there. That's your local. But that, if you don't got business there, you really shouldn't go there. But other than that, there's nowhere I won't go, man, because nothing's going to happen. No one's going to... I mean, if you're a single woman, obviously that's totally different. But, if you're a man, ain't nothing going to happen. Like black people aren't just going to move on you in attack mode just because. But, I mean, in 1992, you better believe they would. There's a reason why Bush deployed the Marine Corps just back from combat in Iraq. And LAPD, LA County Sheriff's, National Guard, FBI, they formed this task force to quite literally engage, the Crips and the Bloods, because they were going to assault downtown LA. And they said, 187 all cops, we're gonna waste white people, we're gonna burn it the fuck down. And so the Marines and this police and PMC task force went to war in the street. It was a race war. I mean, that's unthinkable now. That would never happen now. I've told youngsters about that, and they think I'm exaggerating. And then I pull it up on YouTube, and I'm like, look, I mean, I didn't make this up. I don't make shit up, and also I don't exaggerate. But it was a totally different planet back then, man. And I know a lot of people. I mean, don't get me wrong. The process of history is what it is. Sitting around saying violence is always bad, or we've always got to be afraid of war. That's the wrong way to look at it. But you also shouldn't glorify these things. And black folks being in race war mode, and us being at each other's throats, and me having to plot my movements unless I'm, 5 deep with some friends who are armed. I don't want to live like that, man. That's fucked up. It's not just I'm old. I didn't think it was cool when I was 17. It's not cool, man. If that makes me a big pussy or whatever, fine. But people who talk that way didn't have to deal with it, I maintain.
Yeah, very true indeed. On the subject and the topic of criminality and violence and whatnot. I mean, I know the movie There Will Be Blood is mentioned quite a bit in our circles, but also we were mentioning this a little bit at the start with our mention of Boardwalk Empire, about the Irish connection to organized crime in the United States. Why don't we chat on that for a little bit, and then we can power through some of these super chats and call it a night. So Irish gangs and whatnot.
I mean, as I understand it, and Chicago's a totally different gangster ecosystem than on either coast. It's totally different. You know, I know on the East Coast there's this true crime classic called The Westies. Back when, I mean, now Hell's Kitchen is like any other bougie hood. I mean, it's probably more upscale than a lot of places now. But you know, until the early '90s, Hell's Kitchen was a very tough place, and Irish were never the majority there in terms of, or they were never a plurality among the ethnic groups, but they had outsized clout. And this book called The Westies is fascinating. Like, if you need like a gangster fix of like real gangster shit, you should read Dead City by Shane Stevens and read The Westies. You know, again, The Westies is I'm sure there's some capping in it, but I mean, the guys who it's about were all real guys, you know. And interestingly, one of the Gotti crew, who's the real kind of power behind which was Frank DeChico, in my opinion. They fucked with the Westies, and that's one of the ways they got things done. It's because the Westies were feared, and they were kind of EBKs. Like they'd kill anybody. They didn't care. They weren't afraid of anybody. And like I said, I don't know the East Coast directly. I only know it from like Gangster Lit and stuff. But the Irish are a rep for being serious pipe hitters, and obviously here, just like in, you know, Pete was talking about NYPD being deep with Irish. Chicago PD and Chicago Fire Department is deep as fuck with them. And one of my buddies from law school, I'm not going to drop his name because he's a big shot lawyer now, but he, like in Chicago, my alma mater was John Marshall Law School, and the Core Boy Scholarship, it's the scholarship, and if you're a cop and you got the grades and you also had score to get into John Marshall Law School, you get a free ride. So my buddy was a cop, and that's how he got into John Marshall with a full ride. But he left the police force when we graduated, and he went on to work in this big high flying firm, and then became a judge. And that's like a not unusual trajectory, you know, here, stuff like that. But in the outfit, you know, Chicago outfit, it was always different than the East Coast Mafia. However, the kind of core element was Italians. And there were plenty of Irish who would be the equivalent of made guys in terms of their clout and the percentage of action they controlled and stuff. But the Irish kind of more did their own thing here, and especially on the South Side, until very recently, until my generation, you still had. I mean, the color banging era is long gone. And I mean, gang banging is totally different than it used to be. And for all practical purposes, it's kind of ceased to exist. You know, I realize there's guys who say yeah, we're BDs or we're GDs or we're vice lords. So I mean, a lot of that though is just kind of like wrecking crews that are like branding themselves into like the hood they're from, or like what their dad or their uncle was into or whatever. But through the color bang era, there was white mobs here, which people think is weird. But I'm not talking, but and most of them were actually like white power coded. You know, it wasn't like wigger stuff. But especially on the South Side, you'd have a lot of guys who, you know, they might be clicked up with they might be clicked up with, say, like the South Side Popes or whatever. But there was a discernibly like ethnically Irish branding sort of shot through it, you know. stuff like that. And then there's I'm not gonna name her, but I knew this chick from the south suburbs because I knew this kind of hood Spanish chick from Des Plaines, and Des Plaines is the suburbs, but it's kind of odd. And especially then, it was sort of in transition. This Des Plaines chick, she wasn't my girlfriend or anything, but like we'd hang out and like kick and stuff. And she was friends with this South suburban Irish chick who'd hang out with us sometimes. And her brother was a very feared dude. And he didn't claim any particular mob, but it was him and a bunch of Irish guys and their name just like rang out. You know, there was a lot of that kind of stuff. You know, like I said, I was like a North Shore guy. I mean, I grew up in a real nice hood, and I didn't gangbang or anything like that. You know, but I knew a lot of people who were in that kind of world. These days, you know, to your guys' point, the Irish remain real clannish. I mean, there's Irish dudes in our faction, and in like Mike Hodry, who are local, but they're law-abiding guys, and or at least they're dudes who don't gangbang and stuff. And when I found myself in places like Beverly or like Bridgeport, or back in the day, Wrigleyville is a really interesting part of town, and the old bar, the Blarney Stone, is people who, like any genic Chicagoan, can tell you about that. The old lady Margot, who ran the Blarney Stone, the girl who tended bar there for was this Irish chick, was a Southside Irish chick named Anne. And Anne literally lived above the Blarney Stone. And like when I get this, I'm talking, this was like 25, 30 years ago. That was the Blarney Stone was my hangout. And I'd get, you know, if I had a little too much to drink, like Margot or Anne would tell me, like, yeah, go crash upstairs on Anne's couch. You know, and I did many times. But obviously there was all a bunch of like Northside Irish who were always like in and out of that bar and in and out of like Anne's apartment. You know, dudes and girls who, you know, were like literally police, as well as who were like out and out gangsters. You know, so like I got to know a cross section of the Northside Irish pretty well. But again, like that clannishness was there, man. You know, they'd be aware of when people outside of the tribe are on deck. But I realized they spun this into a longer story than it had to be. But what I got from these guys and girls is, like I said, it like a lot of unspoken familial connections, a lot of neighborhood shit that outsiders wouldn't understand. You know, it's not like they were all gangbanging under the same set or something, or like they were repping like a folks or people mob or something. It was like, yeah, we're the Northside Irish from here, and my dad is this guy, my uncle's that guy, and my grandma is this lady who's also this lady's cousin. So I click up with these guys, and this is what we're into, if that makes any sense.
Definitely can't really relate in that extent, but I mean, all the Irish folk that I have ran into in my days. I mean, I went to an Irish Catholic school when I was growing up, and
that's cool.
You know, so yeah, definitely a lot of.
Did they think it was weird that you're a bird that can talk?
Yeah, very indeed. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know what's odd is I went to a Catholic school that was almost 100% WASP.
Yeah,
like,
I mean that's
like
they became that then the desegregation days, there was places like that here, too, like a bunch of white prod kids who ended up in the Catholic system. I mean, we're thin on the ground here, so I mean, it was more in like outlying suburbs and stuff. But yeah, that's a weird phenomena that I.
Well, it's, you know, if you have a good prep school, then you're not really caring that they're going to have to go to mass every once in a while because the education is so good. You know.
Yeah, I could definitely attest to that. With the high school I went to was Catholic, and they basically took anybody. They took anybody who could pay. You know?
Oh yeah, no, and I went to a Catholic college, man. I went to Loyola Chicago, and I mean, I went there for a reason. I mean, part of it was in those days, you know, you needed library access. I mean, this was when internet was nascent, but they, you know, they had they were not remotely woke. They had, you could study political theory in a dedicated capacity, you know, and the academic culture back then was very amenable to what I was into. You know, I had a great experience with Loyola, man. I think back on I think back in college fondly, and like I think you're kind of a goof if you think high school was awesome anyway. But I mean, I never think fondly like about high school like at all. But like
I didn't like it at all, and you know,
no,
I went to school when the priests would put hands on you and like smack the shit out of you.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I got slapped by a nun once when I was in middle school, and I didn't even deserve it. It wasn't actually me who was causing the problems; it was some other kid. But yeah. Anyway.
No, I don't think it's weird for people outside the faith to go to a Catholic school. I mean that, yeah. I've known plenty of guys and girls who weren't that wasn't their heritage, but they went to Catholic schools. Yeah, that's not weird. No, I like Catholic people, man. I mean, people get the wrong idea because, you know, like Pete said, you know, making fun of people's heritage it just is something we do, especially if you're, you know, a cantankerous Gen Xer. But I mean, shit, man. Chicago's my home. All my closest friends on the ground here, and including the OGC guys who we all love. I mean, they're a bunch of Catholic dudes, man. You know, like that speaks for itself. I'm the oddball on deck, you know, and it's not even a thing, man. Like nobody makes me feel weird or anything, and
yeah, that might be one of the things I hate most in this entire sphere is the various Catholic versus Protestant versus pagan debates we have in these circles. It's just all of it is just horribly unproductive and just doesn't exist when you're actually in the real world. I mean,
well, I mean, that's why, yeah, I got to assume these guys either don't leave their house, or if they do, and that's what they're really like, it's like, wow, you're a bigoted dickhead. You know, like I don't hang out with people like that. You know, no, you're absolutely right, and that's why, like I said, I obviously if I don't know people well, I'm not going to come at them with ethnic or sectarian jokes. But I mean, among friends, I mean, it's just part of how we relate, man. I mean, I take as much shit as I dish out, man. If you make fun of me, I mean, the fellas make fun of me all the time, you know, like it's just part of the ongoing hazing of you know, life as the male of the species.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a part of masculinity that people just like forget. It's like that's how guys relate. It's like that's how I know you're cool. If you're one of my dudes, like I can make fun of you, but if some guy on the street was to come up and say something nasty, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you now.
It's like it's not a great
this past weekend. Thomas called me. I said I wanted to go get some sleep, and Thomas called me a lazy Spaniard going to take a siesta.
Yes, that he did. No, yeah. And yeah, it's all it'd be sus as fuck if you know, somebody took that the wrong way. I mean, admittedly, you know, you got to be, you can't get overly familiar with people, but that's one of the nice things about, you know, going to the lake and seeing you guys and all the fellas. I mean, that's legit one of the highlights of my year, because it's like a big family reunion, and you know, like I'm cool with all of them guys, man. It's, you know, we're like family. That's dope. Speaking of being a lazy Iberian, I'm feeling kind of faded, man.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap up here.
Yeah, let's get into super chats, and then I'm gonna raise up.
Yes,
sounds good.
I need Doug to put the access of the magic Google Doc in the chat here, so I can look at all them super chats, and then we'll get rolling on that. So Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Scrolling up to the top, we've got Adrian Shepard sends us $2. And he says, 777 Mafia, salute. Hail the OGC, salute. Well, thank you, sir. You are a real American.
Thank you, homie.
All right, moving on. Again, he sends another $5. He says, how should Americans take pride in their own history/war traditions given the events of the 20th century without becoming deracinated but not zogged? Boy, that's a $5 super chat. That's like a whole stream for $5.
my heritage has nothing to do with some hostile government fighting, waging war on Europe in alliance with the communists. Like, I wear the bloodstained banner on my person every single day. That's my heritage. The government's got nothing to do with me. Like, why do I need to take? It ain't even like that. Like I said, like, my cultural canon is stuff like the King James Bible and Arthurian lore, and the tradition of the Ulster Yeomanry, man. That's how it is.
I think not to rag on this guy here, but I think this is another problem that a lot of young dudes have. And I imagine this is just something that happens in any time and place, not just ours, even though our time has some other issues. But guys, you're going to get through life where you're going to have like some kind of inconsistencies or whatever, what have you. And like, as it relates to, I don't want to use this like gay leftist term, like your identity or something like this, but like, why are you going to have like your history or something be compromised by what's currently going on with Zog or something like that, man? I mean, like, that's
my
history is my history,
Well, yeah, give unto Caesar what Caesar is due, and I made the point to people too, especially when people are like, they're taking down this monument. It's like, I don't want Zog fucking with my heritage. I don't want them dirtying it with their monuments or anything else. It has nothing to do with them. And this idea that you got to live through regime institutions is bullshit. Somebody the other day was just telling me, it's like a tragedy under the Boy Scouts. I'm like, why are you fucking with the Boy Scouts? I can name you like half a dozen of our people's institutions that teach, youngsters like, camping skills, outdoor skills. There's that communitarian experience, between, the other kids and between the fathers, we get together, learn how to shoot. Like why would you go through some regime institution for that? And just like kind of hope that it doesn't, try and socially engineer your kids away from, their own heritage. Like, it shouldn't even come to that. You shouldn't even bother with that. You should secede.
There you have it. Moving on. Christopher Burke sends us $5 and a salute. Thank you, sir. You are a real American.
Real Americans.
Yeah, there we go. There he is. We got Solid Snake 1964, who was not the first super chatter tonight. How dare you, sir? Unacceptable. Get your cardboard box out of storage and sneak behind enemy lines, man. All right. He sends us $10. Evening, gents. I'm only a smidge Irish, with most of me being German and Norwegian by blood, but I must be making my Irish ancestors proud by being Catholic, loving Irish whiskey, and my love of redheads. Well, who doesn't love a redhead, man? Come on. Hopefully I didn't insult any actual Irishmen that may be listening. Haha. Yeah, that's the other thing too. I mean, Irish whiskey's great. Everyone loves their Jameson, man.
No, I Bushmills. I only drink Bushmills.
Real American.
We got
what Jameson's good with? Jameson makes a really good Irish rover. Add a little bit of Bailey's to it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. But Jameson does it kicks like a mule, man. Like when there's like Bushmills, it's because it's so smooth. Like I said, it's smoother than a prom queen's thighs and not nearly as risky.
I like that. Well,
I got the movie reference.
Yeah.
Son of Haster sends us $5. Oh no. Or he says, time to decide if I'm Irish or Italian or Slavic.
Well, I mean, that's just like deciding like what kind of black person you are. Just say I'm black.
We got Hammerain sends us $10. Says thank you guys. Well, thank you, sir. Skibum220, one of our top super chatters as always, sends us $50. Thank you very much, sir. He says salute the OGC and all heritage Americans. Well, salute to you, sir.
Real Americans.
Yes, indeed, real Americans. Thank you, sir. Seasider sends us $10 and a salute as he does every week. Thank you, Seasider.
Real Americans.
Yes, indeed. And he definitely is a real American. Wolfgang sends us $15. Says, gee, having to catch the stream late. Salute the OGC. Well, thank you, sir.
Real Americans.
And no, I'm not Grim from Red Hood, who is supporting a channel membership star next to his profile. So he's giving us some money every month to watch gaming content. Thank you very much, sir. For $2, he says the Lucky Charms question. Hey man, Lucky Charms is a good cereal. All right, I ate that a lot when I was a little kid.
Lucky Charms isn't bad. This like the cereal that was my favorite like garbage cereal. It was called Circus Fun, and nobody remembers it, but it was so awesome. And it was literally themed after circuses. Like it was just so fucking dope.
Like circus animals and stuff, like those animal.
Yeah, and it was totally surreal though. It was like it was these like kind of nightmarish looking clowns and like balls and like elephants. It was horses, hoops, balls, bears, elephants, and lions. I remember the song.
Huh.
And like when I bring it up, people think I'm on crack or something. I'm like, no, man, Circus Fun existed and it was fucking delicious.
I remember going to being taken to a circus when I was a kid. I mean, they've all like pretty much since been banned now. I don't even think you can go to them anymore. But I do remember when I was a child seeing like the whole elephants and a bunch of like tigers and the whole act and everything. But
it's weird it endured as long as it did, man. Like honestly, it like even if neurotic shitlibs hadn't killed it, it's odd it endured after about the 1950s. You know, then of course, because I'm a Midwesterner, I'm all familiar with the inbred evil cousin of the circus, the carnival.
Those are still around in some places.
Yeah, but no, they're still around here, but they've been totally sanitized. Like back then, I'm talking like when the carnival would come around, like me and my friends, we'd play the carnival games because you could win a prize mirror, you could win a prize cocaine mirror with like Motley Crue on it, and those are like feathered roach clips. There was like a seediness to it. There's like a hair metal in cocaine, like heavily cut cocaine, and like bad tattoos and mullet seediness to it that was glorious.
Interesting.
And the last movie that Thomas and I reviewed was Tobe Hooper's Funhouse.
Yeah, man, that's one of the reasons why I relate to that film. But it's also it's a dope movie. I was watching Hell Night the other day. You know, that was when Linda Blair was in full scream queen mode, and I mean she was an adult then, and that's when she was like kicking it with Rick James, and she'd become kind of like a bad girl, like a bombshell type of a girl. But Hell Night is pretty dope too. It's not as good as the Funhouse, but that's kind of an unsung horror movie too. I've been on a horror film kick, so you might have noticed, man.
Alrighty, moving on to our good friend Mellon sends us $5. He says, hey Thomas, doing some research on Nixon. Do you cover him in any of your work other than the Nixon episode in the Cold War series with Pete?
Yeah, man. Nixon is a consistent the Nixon administration and Nixon the man bears directly on my primary research concentrations. And yeah, the Nixon administration and the 1973 war is a major aspect of my manuscript, which I'm sending off the manuscript April 1st. I've got to I've got to do my taxes and I've got to send the manuscript. I'm going to do those things the first week in April. And I plan to dedicate myself increasingly to long form. Like when this book's finally published, I've got a lot of other long form stuff already completed, as well as sort of in my mind. So yeah, I'm going to continue writing about the 20th century. I'm going to continue writing about how extant conflict paradigms derive in causal terms from the 20th century. And the Nixon administration plays a huge part in that, well, in terms of the trajectory of domestic policy and the, and zeitgeist, as well as in terms of international affairs and things. I'm playing with the idea of writing a fairly brief, like, 200-300 pages, sort of a revisionist history of the Cold War, and focus more on Cold War subject matter. And I want to write, I want to do some writing on the epistemological aspects of the end of the Cold War and the Islamic awakening specifically, and how this has characterized the 21st century in power political terms. And like I've said, Osama bin Laden, I'm not saying we should admire Osama bin Laden or anything like that, but he is the most significant revolutionary since Ho Chi Minh, and they can't be denied. So what I'm getting at is, I cover Nixon in the manuscript. I continue to cover in my content, both written long and short form, as well as in my podcasting stuff.
Well,
check
we
out
also
the YouTube channel for some of that stuff. Yeah, for you being long-winded.
Yeah, we also have a 3 episodes that we did on Nixon and Watergate.
Yeah,
that are out there as a complete file on my podcast channel.
Boy howdy.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And then we got Donnie B for $25. And this is actually not an anthropomorphic super sticker. There we go. So, well, thank you very much for that. And that's us all caught up on the super chats. So we'll go through some promotions and we'll call it a night here. So Pete, where can people find your stuff now that they don't see you on YouTube much? And what do you have coming up?
Honestly, the only thing I was putting on YouTube were the 200 Years Together episodes, and they were all on Rumble, and Odyssey, so you can just slide right on over there. Just released the 3rd episode with George Bagby. Released that tonight on the road to the war between the states, and we got into John Taylor of Caroline and the agrarians versus the city folk.
Yeah, Bagby's awesome, man.
Oh yeah, very, very good dude indeed. Thomas, where can people find more of your stuff? And thank you for coming on as ever. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for including me. I always get a kick out of being included on OGC streams. You should go to my website. It's Thomas777.com, number 7, HOMAS 777.com. That's you can pretty much access all my content. My Substack is realthomas777.substack.com. And you can also find me on YouTube. It's Thomas TV at number 7 HOMAS number 7V. So Thomas TV. Seek and you shall find.
All right, perfect. Everyone definitely make sure to look that up. And then we got a last minute super chat from Volpe's Persona, who's also supporting a channel membership star. Thank you very much. He sends us a salute. Well, thank you, sir. You are a real American.
Real Americans.
All righty. And that is going to be it for us here tonight. Everyone be sure to tune into American Spirits on Mondays, Chapter House on Wednesday, and also check out the OGC Substack. There's some really good stuff coming out next week and in the next couple of days on the Substack. Some very, very important articles. So be sure to look for that. And then also, if you guys want to become channel members, please do. We're having a lot of fun with our Warhammer streams. We do them maybe once, sometimes twice a week. So be sure to check those out as well. And we'll see you guys soon.